They toasted my ruin with wine worth a year of my parents' rent. Chloe Vance, the 22-year-old intern, smirked with elite contempt while my husband Julian looked at me like outdated furniture. They thought they had taken everything, calling me a failed gold digger. But they forgot that we born at the bottom survive in the dark. They did not know the rusty key my crazy aunt left was about to unlock the coffin that would bury their glittering empire. My name is Iris Silverton, and until 3 hours ago, I was the rising star of New York architecture. I was 32 years old, standing in the climate-controlled stillness of the Sterling and Architects boardroom, smoothing the fabric of a suit that cost more than my father made in 6 months. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, a jagged jaw of steel and glass that I had spent my entire life trying to conquer. Today was supposed to be my coronation. I was about to present the summit, a 70-story marvel of sustainable engineering that was not just a building, but a philosophy made of concrete and light. It was my design, my vision. My soul poured into blueprints for the last 18 months. The air in the room smelled of expensive coffee and old money. The board members sat around the mahogany table like a jury of vultures in bespoke tailoring. They were waiting for me. I checked my reflection in the darkened glass of the window. I looked the part. I had scrubbed the poverty off my skin years ago, layering over it with education, diction, and the kind of aggressive competence that makes people afraid to question your background. I was ready, or at least, I thought I was. The double doors opened, and my husband, Julian Thorne, walked in. He was the CEO, the heir to the Sterling legacy, and the man I had trusted with every fragile part of myself. He looked impeccable in a navy suit that fit him like a second skin, his face composed in that mask of aristocratic boredom he wore so well. But he was not alone. Walking a half-step behind him, close enough that her arm brushed against his jacket, was Chloe Vance. Chloe was 22 years old. She was our intern, the daughter of a banking tycoon whose vault held enough leverage to buy half the city. She was wearing a dress that was technically appropriate for the office, but fit her in a way that suggested she had just rolled out of a very expensive bed. She had the kind of pedigree that meant she had never heard the word no in her entire life. As they entered, Julian placed a hand on the small of her back. It was a gesture so casual, so proprietary, that it sucked the air out of my lungs. It was not the touch of a boss guiding a subordinate. It was the touch of a man claiming what was his. I felt a cold prickle of unease crawl up my spine, but I forced a smile. I stepped toward the podium, reaching for my laptop to connect it to the main screen. That was when the doors opened again. 2 men in dark suits stepped in. I recognized the head of security, a man named Miller who usually greeted me with a nod. Today, his face was stone. "Ms. Silverton," Miller said, his voice loud enough to silence the low murmur of the board members. "Please step away from the computer." I froze, my hand hovering over the HDMI cable. "Excuse me. We have detected a massive data breach originating from your terminal," Miller announced, walking toward me with the heavy, inevitable stride of an executioner. "Corporate espionage, the transfer of proprietary designs for the summit to our direct competitors in Dubai. The transfer was completed 10 minutes ago." The room erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as board members gasped. I looked at Julian, desperate for him to intervene, to laugh, to tell them this was a mistake, but Julian did not look at me. He was looking at the table, shaking his head with a performance of deep, sorrowful regret. I did not do that. I stammered, the polish of my sophisticated persona cracking to reveal the scared girl from the wrong side of the tracks underneath. "You can check the logs. I have been standing here for 20 minutes prepping for the presentation. We have the logs," Julian said. His voice was calm, deadly calm. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were devoid of any warmth. They were flat and hard, like river stones. "The IP address matches your private server. Iris, the payment from the competitor has already been flagged in an offshore account linked to your name. It was a lie, a comprehensive, intricate lie." But before I could scream, Before I could demand, they bring in IT forensics. Julian turned to the board. "I am devastated," he said, his voice catching with practiced emotion. "I vouchsafed for her. I brought her into this company. I married her. To find out that she has been selling us out for months, it breaks my heart. But the integrity of Sterling and Architects comes first. Effective immediately. Iris is terminated for cause. We will be pressing criminal charges for intellectual property theft. Security. Remove her." A board member shouted. "No," I yelled. As Miller grabbed my arm, "This is my design. The summit is mine. You cannot do this." Julian held up a hand. "Wait. We still have a presentation to give. The investors are expecting a reveal today." He turned to the girl standing beside him. "Chloe, you have been working closely with Iris. Do you think you can step in?" Chloe Vance stepped forward. She did not look nervous. She did not look like an intern being asked to save a disaster. She looked like she was stepping onto a stage that had been built for her. "I can, Julian," she said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "I have actually been doing most of the heavy lifting on the design for the last 3 months while Iris was distracted. I know the project inside and out. It was such a blatant falsehood that I almost laughed. Chloe could barely operate the rendering software. She spent her days shopping online and flirting with senior partners. But as I watched, she pulled a flash drive from her purse, a silver drive that matched her jewelry, and plugged it into the system. The screen flickered to life. My renderings appeared, my calculations, my structural innovations. But the title slide did not say Lead Architect Iris Silverton. It said Lead Architect Chloe Vance. "Get her out of here," Julian snapped, signaling the guards. As Miller dragged me past the podium, I dug my heels into the plush carpet, fighting with everything I had. I locked eyes with Chloe. She paused in her setup and leaned toward me. For a second, we were inches apart, intimate as conspirators. She smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smirk of a predator who knows the prey has no teeth left. "You never belonged here. Trash," she whispered, the words sliding into my ear like poison. "Julian only married you for your brain. He needed someone to do the work. Now that I have the files, we do not need the worker ant anymore. Go back to the gutter." The doors slammed shut in my face, muting the sound of applause that erupted from inside. They were clapping for her. They were clapping for my life's work, stolen and repackaged in a designer dress. I was escorted to the elevator and shoved inside. Miller did not look at me. He stripped my security badge from my lapel and handed me a small plastic bag containing my phone and wallet, which they had confiscated from my desk. "Do not come back. Ms. Silverton," he said. "If you step foot on the property, you will be arrested for trespassing." I stumbled out of the lobby and onto the sidewalk. The sky had opened up, a torrential downpour that turned New York gray and hostile. I stood there, shivering in my suit, soaked to the bone within seconds. I checked my phone. I had 17 missed notifications from my bank. I hailed a taxi, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my phone twice. I needed to get home. I needed to get to the penthouse, to my safe, to the backup hard drives I kept hidden in the study. If I could get the metadata, I could prove the files were mine. The ride to our building on the Upper East Side took 40 minutes in the rain. I threw a wad of cash at the driver, my hands were too wet to work the screen, and ran for the awning. The doorman, a man named Henry, whom I had tipped $500 every Christmas, stepped in front of the revolving door. "I am sorry." "Mrs. Thorne," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I cannot let you up." "Henry, get out of my way," I snapped, pushing past him. "I live here." "Not anymore," a voice said from the lobby. A man I did not recognize was sitting on the velvet bench near the elevators. He stood up as I entered. He was holding a briefcase and wearing the kind of suit that screamed billable hours. "Mrs. Thorne or Ms. Silverton. I should say, I am Arthur Pendleton, representing Mr. Julian Thorne." He handed me a thick envelope. "What is this?" I asked, water dripping from my hair onto the marble floor. "Divorce papers," he said efficiently, "and a restraining order." You are barred from the residence effective immediately. Your personal effects will be boxed and sent to a storage facility, provided you sign the non-disclosure agreement regarding your exit from the company. I stared at him. You cannot kick me out of my own home. My name is on the deed. Actually, it is not, Pendleton said. Opening a folder, the prenuptial agreement you signed had a morality clause, specifically regarding infidelity and criminal activity. By committing corporate espionage and, as Mr. Thorne alleges, engaging in an affair with a competitor to sell those secrets, you have voided your claim to the marital assets. The apartment belongs solely to the Thorne Trust. Affair, I choked out the word. I never, Mr. Thorne has texts, emails, and witness testimony, Pendleton interrupted smoothly. Fabricated, of course, but legally binding until proven otherwise, and given that your joint accounts have been frozen pending the investigation into the theft. And your personal cards have been canceled by the issuer due to suspicious activity. I suggest you find somewhere else to stay. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Face ID failed because of the rain on the lens. I typed in my passcode with trembling fingers. Account balance: $0.00. Checking closed. Savings closed. Investment portfolio transferred. I looked up at Pendleton. He looked bored. This was just a Tuesday for him. He destroyed lives before lunch and billed for the time. This is illegal, I whispered. You cannot just strip me of everything. It is already done. Ms. Silverton. He gestured to the door. Please leave the premises, or I will have the police escort you away, and given the warrant that is likely being drafted for your arrest right now, I would advise against police involvement. I looked at Henry, the doorman. He was studying the pattern on the floor tiles. No one was going to help me. I was a contagion. I was radioactive. I turned around and walked back out into the rain. The adrenaline that had sustained me in the taxi was fading, replaced by a cold, heavy shock. I had no home. I had no job. I had no money. I had no reputation. 2 hours ago, I was on top of the world. Now, I was standing on a sidewalk in a thunderstorm with nothing but the wet clothes on my back and a purse containing a lipstick, a pack of mints, and a phone that was rapidly running out of battery. I walked. I did not know where I was going. I just walked until my heels blistered and my toes went numb. I passed shop windows displaying jewelry I used to buy without looking at the price tag. I passed restaurants where the maitre d' knew my name. I was a ghost haunting my own life. I eventually found myself huddled under the awning of a closed bakery, shivering violently. I opened my purse and counted the cash I had left. $42. That was it. That was the sum total of my worth. I thought about Julian. I thought about the way he had looked at Chloe. The way he had planned this. It had to be planned. The fake logs, the bank transfers, the security team, the lawyer in the lobby. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a demolition, a controlled implosion of Iris Silverton. They had not just fired me. They had erased me. They wanted to make sure I could never rise again. They wanted me to be exactly what Chloe had called me: trash. I leaned my head against the cold brick wall and closed my eyes. The rain sounded like static. I was 32 years old, and my life was over. Or so they thought. The cold was seeping into my marrow. But beneath the shivering, beneath the shock, something else was starting to catch fire. It was a small, angry flame. I remembered the smirk. I remembered the way Chloe had claimed my work. I remembered Julian's performance of regret. They thought the story ended here. They thought I would fade away, disappear into the gray noise of the city, another tragic woman who couldn't handle the pressure. I opened my eyes and looked at the wet, dark street. I had $42. I had no coat. I was alone. But as I watched a rat scurry across the gutter, surviving against the elements, I realized something. I was not one of them. I never had been. I was a survivor. And survivors do not die in the rain. I stood up, wincing as my blisters throbbed. I needed a plan. But first, I needed to survive the night. I gripped my purse strap tighter. The destruction was perfect, yes, but perfection is brittle. and I was about to become the hammer. The first thing I learned about poverty was that it had a smell. It was not just the absence of perfume or the stale scent of unwashed clothes. It was the smell of damp drywall, of leaking pipes behind thin walls, and of anxiety sweating out of your pores at 3 a.m. I sold my wedding ring 48 hours after I was thrown out of the Sterling building. It was a platinum band with a 3-carat diamond that Julian had placed on my finger during a sunset in Santorini. The pawnbroker, a man with grease under his fingernails and eyes that had seen every variety of human desperation, offered me $2,000 for it. I knew it was insured for $45,000. I tried to argue, my voice cracking with a mixture of indignation and panic. But he just shrugged and started counting out $100 bills. He knew I had nowhere else to go. I took the money. I also sold my watch, a vintage piece I had bought for myself after my first big commission. That got me another $2,800. That was the price of my past life. I used the money to put a deposit on a basement studio in the South Bronx. To call it a studio was generous. It was a concrete box with a single window that looked out onto a trash alley at pavement level. The ceiling was low enough that I could touch it if I stood on my toes. And the pipes from the apartments above rattled like dying machinery every time someone flushed a toilet. The rent was $900 a month. The landlord, a man named Mr. Kowalski who chewed unlit cigars, did not ask for a credit check. He just asked for cash up front and told me that if I caused trouble, he would change the locks. For the first week, I just lay on the mattress I had dragged in from the street, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. I was paralyzed. I kept waiting to wake up in my silk sheets on the Upper East Side, waiting for Julian to walk in with espresso and a croissant, laughing about a terrible nightmare. But the only thing that woke me up was the sound of police sirens wailing down the block or the scuttling of rats in the walls. When the shock finally wore off, the hunger set in. I needed a job. I went to the local library to use their computers because I could not afford a data plan for my phone. I updated my resume, removing the Sterling name, hoping to find work at a smaller firm, perhaps a boutique agency that valued skill over reputation. I sent out 50 applications in 3 days. I got 4 replies. All of them were rejections. One of them, a small firm in Brooklyn, actually called me. The hiring manager sounded uncomfortable. He told me that my portfolio was impressive, brilliant even. But then he paused. He said that when they ran a standard background check, my name triggered a dozen alerts. Corporate espionage, theft, pending litigation. He told me they could not risk the liability. He hung up before I could explain that I had been framed. I tried to reach out to my network. These were people I had dined with, people whose children I had bought birthday gifts for, people who had toasted to my genius at galas. I called Sarah, a landscape architect I had considered a close friend. Her number went straight to voicemail. I texted Michael, a structural engineer I had mentored. The message was delivered, read, and ignored. Finally, I called Elena. We had gone to graduate school together. She picked up on the third ring. "Iris," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You cannot call me. Elena, please," I begged, sitting on the plastic chair in the library, trying to keep my voice steady. "I did not do it. You know me. You know how hard I work. I know what the news says," she hissed. "Julian gave an exclusive interview to the Times. He said you have been selling secrets for months to cover gambling debts. He said you are unstable. Iris, if I am seen talking to you, I will lose my contracts with Sterling. Do not call me again." The line went dead. That was the moment I realized the extent of my isolation. Julian had not just fired me, he had quarantined me. He had turned me into a social leper. By the 3rd week, my cash was running low. I stopped buying fresh produce. I ate instant noodles and bread. I washed my clothes in the bathtub with dish soap. But rent was coming due again, and I was $300 short. I could not be an architect. I could not be a consultant. I could not even be a receptionist because every Google search of my name brought up the mugshot-style photo the tabloids had run next to the headline, "The Architect of Deceit." So I became invisible. I found a job posting on a tear-off flyer at the laundromat. Night cleaning crew, cash payment, no questions asked. The interview consisted of a woman looking at my hands and asking if I could lift a 50-pound bucket. I said yes. That night, I started work. I was assigned to a commercial office building in Midtown. Not a sterling building, thank God, but close enough that I could see the skyline I used to shape. My shift started at 10 at night and ended at 6 in the morning. I wore a gray uniform that was 2 sizes too big and smelled of industrial bleach. I pushed a cart filled with cleaning supplies through silent, empty corridors. There was a cruel irony in scrubbing the toilets of men and women who did the exact job I used to do. I wiped down drafting tables. I emptied recycling bins filled with discarded sketches. I vacuumed meeting rooms where strategy sessions had taken place hours before. I was a ghost in the machine of corporate America. I kept my head down. I wore a hat pulled low. I did not speak to the other cleaners, mostly immigrants who were too tired to care about the woman who scrubbed floors with the efficiency of someone trying to erase her own existence. It was grueling work. My back ached constantly. My hands, once used to holding delicate drafting pencils, became raw and chapped from the chemicals. But it paid $12 an hour. It was survival. One night, about a month into this hell, I was mopping the lobby of a financial firm on the 30th floor. There was a large flat-screen television mounted on the wall, tuned to a 24-hour news channel. The volume was muted, but the captions were scrolling across the bottom. I glanced up as I wrung out the mop, and I froze. There, on the screen, was a face I knew better than my own. Julian. He was standing at a podium, wearing a hard hat and holding a golden shovel. Beside him stood Chloe. She looked radiant, dressed in a white cashmere coat that probably cost more than I would make in 5 years of cleaning. On her finger sat a diamond that was suspiciously similar to the one I had pawned, only bigger. The caption read, "Sterling and Architects breaks ground on the summit. CEO, Julian Thorne announces engagement to Chloe Vance." I dropped the mop. The handle clattered loudly against the marble floor, echoing in the empty lobby. I walked toward the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The camera zoomed in on Chloe. She was smiling that same demure, practiced smile. She leaned into the microphone. I read the scrolling captions as she spoke. "We are so excited to bring this vision to life." The text read, "This building represents the future of New York. It has been a labor of love for Julian and me. We poured our hearts into this design." She was claiming it. She was standing there, on national television, taking credit for the cantilevered terraces I had spent months calculating. She was taking credit for the wind turbines integrated into the spire. My signature innovation, and Julian was standing there, beaming at her with pride. They were erasing me completely, not just destroying my present, but stealing my past. I felt a scream building in my throat, a primal sound of rage and grief, but I swallowed it down. I could not scream. If I screamed, security would come. If security came, I would lose this job. If I lost this job, I would starve. So I picked up the mop. I dipped it into the gray water, and I continued to clean the floor while my husband and his mistress celebrated their victory on the screen above my head. 2 days later, I came home to find a note taped to my door. It was from Mr. Kowalski. "Rent is 3 days late. You have 24 hours to pay in full or get out. I do not run a charity." I sank down onto the cold concrete floor of the hallway. I checked my wallet. I had $60. My next pay envelope was not due for another week. I had nothing left to sell. I had sold the laptop. I had sold the designer handbag. I was stripped bare. I went inside and locked the door. The apartment was freezing. The heating had been spotty for days, and the dampness from the recent rain had turned the air into ice. I needed warmth. I started rummaging through the single plastic bin that contained the few possessions I had managed to keep. I pulled out a sweater, but it was thin and moth-eaten. I pulled out a scarf, and then, at the bottom of the bin, I felt heavy wool. I pulled it out. It was a coat, an oversized, shapeless, charcoal gray wool coat that smelled faintly of lavender and mothballs. It had belonged to my great-aunt Harriet. I stared at it, a bitter laugh bubbling up in my chest. Aunt Harriet, the family pariah, the crazy woman. She had died 8 months ago, leaving behind a house full of newspapers and canned beans. My mother used to warn me about her. Do not end up like Harriet. She would say, she's paranoid. She thinks the government is watching her. She hoards trash. When Harriet died, nobody wanted to deal with her estate because there was no estate. Just debt and a falling-down house in Queens. I had gone over there to help clear it out, mostly out of guilt. Harriet had always been kind to me in her strange, distant way. She used to send me birthday cards with cryptic messages about trusting no one. This coat was the only thing I had kept. I kept it not because I liked it was ugly and scratchy, but because on the day of her funeral, it had been raining, and I had forgotten my umbrella. I had thrown it into my trunk and forgotten about it until the day I was evicted. When I grabbed it blindly along with my other clothes, I put it on. It swallowed me whole. The sleeves were too long, and the shoulders were padded in a way that had not been fashionable since 1980. But it was warm, it was thick, heavy wool that blocked out the chill of the basement. I sat on the mattress, wrapping the coat tighter around myself. I felt something hard pressing against my ribs. I frowned. I patted the side of the coat. There was a lump in the lining, just below the left armpit. It felt too geometric to be a button or a wad of tissue. I took the coat off and laid it on the mattress under the single bare light bulb. I ran my fingers along the seam of the lining. It had been sewn shut with clumsy, mismatched black thread, different from the machine stitching of the rest of the garment. Harriet must have repaired it herself. I grabbed the small sewing kit I had bought at the dollar store and used the tiny scissors to snip the thread. I reached inside the lining. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a key. But not a normal house key. It was a sleek, heavy black card made of metal, shaped like a credit card but thicker. It had no magnetic strip, no numbers, no bank logo, just a small, golden chip embedded in the center, and a holographic symbol that looked like a mountain peak. It looked expensive. It looked modern. It looked completely out of place in the possession of a woman who clipped coupons to buy cat food. I reached back into the lining. There was something else. I pulled out a folded piece of silver foil, the kind used to wrap chocolate bars. I unfolded it carefully. Inside, written in shaky, spidery ballpoint ink, was a sequence of numbers and letters. 12755 Broad Street, Unit B, 491. I stared at the paper. Broad Street. That was in the financial district. That was the heart of money. Why would Aunt Harriet, a woman who lived on a pension and died with $300 in her bank account, have a high-tech key and an address in the most expensive neighborhood in the city? I looked at the key again. It hummed slightly in my hand, or maybe that was just my imagination, but for the first time in weeks, the crushing weight of despair lifted just an inch. It was a mystery, and a mystery was better than a dead end. I looked at the clock on my phone. It was 3 a.m. I had to be at my cleaning job in 4 hours if I wanted to keep it, but I knew I would not be sleeping tonight. I gripped the key in my fist. They had taken my keys. They had taken my access. They had locked me out of my own life. But here, in the lining of a dead woman's coat, was a new key. I did not know what it opened. I did not know if it led to a storage locker full of old newspapers or something else. But as I sat in that freezing basement, smelling the mold and listening to the rats, I knew one thing. I was going to Broad Street. I recognized the address not because I had ever been there, but because in my former life, I had designed a renovation for the lobby of the building next door. 127 Broad Street was not an office building. It was not a bank. It was a fortress disguised as limestone and wrought iron. It housed the New York branch of Viridian Vaults, a private Swiss storage facility that catered to clients who found offshore accounts too public and Cayman Island shell companies too transparent. It was a place where billionaires stored the things they did not want the IRS or their spouses to know about. And I was standing in front of it wearing a coat that smelled of mothballs and shoes that were held together by hope and superglue. I had spent my last $3 on a subway ticket to get here. My stomach was making a hollow, grinding sound that I prayed the doorman could not hear. I looked at the reflection in the polished brass plaque. I looked deranged. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot. My skin was gray from lack of sun and food, and the oversized wool coat made me look like a child playing dress-up in a thrift store. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The air inside was cool and smelled of beeswax and money that specific, crisp scent of filtered air that never touches garbage. The lobby was empty except for a single desk made of black marble. Behind it sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of the same stone. He wore a suit that probably cost more than the entire building I had been living in for the past month. He looked up as I approached. His eyes flicked over my scuffed boots, the frayed hem of the coat, and the dark circles under my eyes. He did not blink. He just reached for a small button under the desk, likely the one that summoned security to remove the vagrants. "Can I help you?" he asked. His tone suggested that the only help he wanted to offer was directions to the nearest homeless shelter. "I have an appointment," I said, my voice raspy. Or rather, I have a key. I reached into the pocket of the coat and pulled out the black metal card. I placed it on the marble surface. It made a heavy, solid clink that echoed in the silence. The man stared at the card. He did not touch it. He looked at me again, his expression shifting from annoyance to suspicion. "That is a distinctive key, madam," he said slowly. "May I ask where you acquired it?" "It was left to me," I said, standing as tall as I could in my oversized coat. "By my aunt, Harriet?" He hesitated, then picked up the card with a gloved hand. He slid it into a discreet reader embedded in the desktop. I held my breath. I half expected an alarm to blare. I expected police to burst in and arrest me for stealing a dead woman's access card. I expected Julian's face to appear on a screen, laughing at me for falling into another trap. The reader flashed blue, then it flashed a deep, pulsing gold. A chime sounded, soft but resonant, like a temple bell. The man's eyes widened. He looked at the screen embedded in his desk, and the color drained from his face. He stood up immediately, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He buttoned his jacket with trembling fingers and bowed. Not a nod, a full, respectful bow. "I apologize. Ms. Silverton," he said, his voice dropping an octave to a tone of reverent hush. "I did not realize. We were not expecting a visit from the platinum tier today. The system indicates this account has been dormant for 30 years. 30 years. Please, follow me," he said, stepping out from behind the desk. "I will escort you personally." He led me past the elevators to a set of reinforced steel doors. He placed his hand on a biometric scanner, and the doors hissed open. We descended a staircase that seemed to go down into the bedrock of Manhattan. The air grew cooler. We passed rows of safety deposit boxes that looked like standard bank vaults, but we kept walking. We reached the end of the corridor, where a single, massive circular door made of titanium stood. The man stepped back. "Unit B491, he said. "The privacy protocol is in effect. There are no cameras inside. I will wait here." I stepped forward. I inserted the black key into the slot. The mechanism turned with the smooth, oiled precision of a Swiss watch. The heavy door swung open. I stepped inside. The room was small, lined with wood paneling. In the center was a table and a single chair. On the shelves against the wall sat 3 large, fireproof document boxes and a small, heavy iron safe. I sat down. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to steady them. I reached for the first box. It was labeled in Harriet's handwriting, "The Truth." I opened it. On top lay a letter. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the ink was fresh, or at least, fresher than the paper. It was dated 8 months ago, 2 days before she died. "My dearest Iris, if you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means they finally broke you, or tried to. It means you are desperate enough to listen to the crazy old woman in the raincoat. I know what you think of me. I know what the family says. Harriet the hoarder. Harriet, the paranoid conspiracy theorist. Harriet, who lost her mind after her husband left her. I let them believe it. It was the only way to stay alive. I was not crazy, Iris, and I was not poor. In fact, I was the wealthiest woman you never knew. 40 years ago, before you were born, I founded a company called Horizon Structures. My partner was a charming, ambitious man named Reginald Thorne, Julian's father. My breath hitched. Reginald Thorne was a legend in the industry, the titan who built the Sterling Empire before passing it to Julian. I was the architect. The letter continued. He was the face. I designed the foundations. He shook the hands. We were building an empire, but Reginald was greedy. He did not want to share. He wanted it all. He forged my signature on transfer documents. He bribed 3 judges to declare me mentally incompetent. He stole my patents, my designs, and my shares. He renamed the company Sterling and Architects, and he threw me out on the street with nothing but a settlement check that barely covered a month of rent. I could have fought him then, but I knew I would lose. He had the money. I had the stigma of madness. So I decided to play the long game, the very long game. I took the small amount of money I had left, and I invested it. I invested aggressively. I bought stocks in companies that Reginald thought were worthless tech startups in the 90s, biotech in the 2000s. I compounded my wealth in the shadows, while living like a pauper so no one would look twice at me. And while I made money, I watched them. I hired private investigators. I planted listening devices in their summer homes before security tech got too advanced. I collected every dirty secret the Thorne family and their new allies, the Vances, ever tried to bury. I put the letter down, my heart pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer. Harriet had not been hoarding trash. She had been hoarding ammunition. I reached for the second box. It was filled with cassette tapes, USB drives, and stacks of documents. I picked up a file labeled Vance Banking, Laundering Operations. I flipped it open. It contained bank statements, wire transfer records, and emails. It detailed a massive scheme where the Vance family bank had been funneling drug cartel money through shell construction companies owned by Sterling and Architects, Julian's company, my husband's company. They were washing dirty money through our building projects. That was why they always went over budget. That was why materials always cost 3 times the market rate. They were inflating costs to clean illegal cash. And then I saw the third box. It was labeled The Summit. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a land deed, an original, notarized deed for a plot of land in Midtown Manhattan, the exact city block where the summit was currently breaking ground. I read the document. The land had been purchased 32 years ago by a blind trust called the Silverton Trust. The beneficiary of the trust was me, Iris Silverton. I bought that land the day you were born. Harriet's letter continued on the second page. I knew it was the Keystone lot. I knew eventually Sterling would need it to build their masterpiece. I wanted you to have leverage. I wanted you to own the ground they walked on. Reginald and Julian think they own it. They think they bought it from a shell corporation last year. But look closely at the transfer deed they have on file. I included a copy here. The signature on the sale document is mine. Or rather, a forgery of mine. Julian forged the sale. He built his flagship tower. His legacy. On land that belongs to you. He is not just a thief. Iris, he is a trespasser. I stared at the deed. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Julian and Chloe were building a billion-dollar skyscraper on my land. They had forged the sale because they could not find the real owner, and they assumed the trust was dormant or dead. They had built their castle on quicksand, and I held the shovel. I looked at the small iron safe in the corner. The letter said the combination was my birthday. I spun the dial. Right to 1, left to 2, right to 6. The safe clicked open. Inside, there were no papers, just stacks of cash, thick, strapped bundles of $100 bills, and sitting on top of the money was a black card, identical to the key I had used to enter. But this one was a master debit card linked to the Swiss account. There is $2 million in cash in this safe. The letter concluded, consider it your war chest. The account linked to this card holds the rest of my investment portfolio. As of this morning, the total value is slightly over $50 million. It is all yours. Iris, the land, the money, the evidence. Do not just get angry, get even. Do not just sue them, destroy them, build something new on their ashes. Love, Aunt Harriet. I sat back in the chair. I looked at the cash. $2 million. Enough to buy an army of lawyers. Enough to buy a new wardrobe. Enough to buy fear. And $50 million in the bank. I looked at my hands. They were still red and chapped from scrubbing floors. My fingernails were broken. I was still wearing the cleaner's clothes under the wool coat. But the woman reflected in the polished metal of the safe door was different. The despair that had been crushing my lungs for weeks evaporated. In its place, a cold, sharp clarity settled in. It was the feeling of a structural engineer realizing that the building she is inspecting has a fatal flaw in the foundation. Julian and Chloe had celebrated destroying me. They had laughed at my poverty. They had called me unworthy. But they had made a critical error. They had assumed the game was over because they had taken my pieces off the board. They did not know that I owned the board. I reached out and picked up a bundle of cash. It felt heavy. It felt real. I stood up. I took the black card and slipped it into my pocket. I took the deed to the land and the file on the money laundering and placed them into the waterproof bag I had brought. I left the rest of the cash. I only took one bundle of $10,000 for immediate expenses and locked the safe. I walked out of the vault. I walked back up the long corridor, past the deference of the manager who bowed again as I passed. I stepped out onto Broad Street. The sun had come out. Piercing through the clouds, people were rushing past me, men in suits talking on phones, women in heels carrying lattes. They looked at me and saw a homeless woman in a ragged coat. They swerved to avoid me. I took a deep breath of the city air. I hailed a taxi, not a subway, a taxi. Where to the driver asked. Looking at me in the rearview mirror with skepticism, I pulled out a $100 bill and handed it to him. Take me to the Pierre Hotel. I said, and wait while I check in. I was not going back to the basement. I was not going back to the mop. Iris Silverton, the victim, had died in that vault. The woman who walked out was someone else entirely, and she had work to do. It was an industrial loft with exposed brick walls and steel beams, starkly different from the beige, suffocating luxury of the Upper East Side apartment I had shared with Julian. This place felt like a bunker. It was cold, modern, and impenetrable. I needed soldiers. I found Marcus first. He was a private investigator who operated out of a cramped office in Hell's Kitchen. He was formerly NYPD, pushed out for asking too many questions about corruption in his precinct. He had a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite and then dropped on the sidewalk. I put a stack of cash on his desk, $20,000, and told him I needed eyes on Julian Thorne 24 hours a day. I wanted to know what he ate, who he spoke to, and how often he fought with his new fiancée. Then I found Elias. Elias was a lawyer who had been disbarred 5 years ago. His crime was leaking documents that proved his own firm was covering up an environmental disaster for a chemical giant. He was brilliant, ethical to a fault, and currently working as a paralegal for a tenant advocacy group. I met him in a diner and showed him a sample of the financial records from Harriet's vault. He took one look at the numbers, adjusted his glasses, and smiled. It was a wolfish smile. "They are insolvent," Elias said, tapping the spreadsheet with a nicotine-stained finger. "Look at the cash flow. Sterling and Architects is hemorrhaging money. They are moving funds between shell accounts to make the balance sheet look healthy for the quarterly reports. But the liquidity is gone." "Where did it go?" I asked. "Gambling debts. Mostly," Elias said, "and blackmail payments. Your husband has been paying off local inspectors to ignore safety violations on his other sites. But the big hole is the summit. Construction costs have ballooned. They are over budget by 40%. If they do not get a massive injection of capital within 30 days, the loans will be called in. The bank will seize everything, so he is desperate." I said, "He is drowning." Elias corrected. "He needs a lifeline. He needs a dumb investor with deep pockets who does not ask too many questions about why the foundation concrete costs 3 times the market rate. That was the weakness. That was the crack in the armor. I spent the next 3 days crafting the weapon. Her name was Vivian Qua. Vivian was everything Iris Silverton was not. Iris was quiet, practical, and blended into the background. Iris wore sensible heels and tied her hair back to be taken seriously. Vivian was loud, aggressive, and commanded the room by simply existing within it. I went to a salon in Soho that did not have a sign out front, only a doorbell. I told the stylist, a man who treated hair like sculpture, to cut it all off. "Are you sure?" he asked, holding up a long strand of my natural brunette hair. "This is virgin hair. It is healthy. Cut it," I said, "and bleach it. I want it white, not blonde." Platinum. Ice. I watched in the mirror as Iris fell to the floor in clumps of brown waves. When the chair turned around 3 hours later, a stranger stared back at me. My hair was a sharp, angular pixie cut, dyed a shocking, blinding white. It highlighted the sharp angles of my cheekbones that poverty had carved out. I looked severe. I looked dangerous. I went shopping. I did not go to the department stores where I used to shop for work clothes. I went to the avant-garde boutiques in the meatpacking district. I bought structural jackets with exaggerated shoulders, leather trousers that fit like skin, and 6-inch heels that were more weapon than footwear. I bought oversized sunglasses with black lenses that hid my eyes completely. I practiced the accent in front of the mirror. It was a transatlantic hybrid, mostly American, but with flattened vowels that suggested time spent at boarding schools in Switzerland or France. It was the accent of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Vivian Qua was the representative of the Qua Family Trust, a private equity fund based in Zurich. Her background was fabricated by a hacker Marcus knew, a kid who inserted my new identity into databases so effectively that even a background check would show I had attended the Sorbonne and worked in Singapore. I was ready. The debut happened on a Tuesday night. It was a contemporary art auction at Christie's. I knew Julian would be there. He collected art not because he loved it, but because he thought it made him look cultured. He and Chloe were looking to decorate the penthouse, my penthouse, and they wanted a statement piece. I arrived 15 minutes late. I walked into the auction room wearing a blood-red Alexander McQueen suit and the dark glasses. I did not take them off even though it was indoors. I sat in the front row, crossing my legs and ignoring the whispers. Julian and Chloe were sitting 3 rows back. I could feel their eyes on me. Everyone's eyes were on me. I was the new player, the unknown variable. The auctioneer presented the lot Julian wanted. It was a chaotic, aggressive abstract painting by a rising Berlin artist. The starting bid was $200,000. $250, Julian called out, raising his paddle. He looked smug. He wanted to show Chloe he could buy her whatever she pointed at. $300, I said, not lifting my paddle, just raising a gloved finger. My voice was low, bored. Julian stiffened. He looked at me, squinting. He did not recognize me. How could he? I was a platinum-haired vision in couture, not the mousy wife he had discarded in the rain. $350, Julian said, his voice tighter. $400. I countered instantly. Chloe leaned over and whispered something to him. I saw her glare at me. She hated being upstaged. She was used to being the youngest, prettiest, richest girl in the room. $450, Julian said. This was clearly his limit. I knew his finances better than he did. I knew he was bidding with money he did not technically have. I turned my head slightly, just enough so he could see my profile. I smiled. It was a cold, razor-thin smile. 1 million. I said. The room gasped. The auctioneer blinked, momentarily losing his professional composure. $1 million to the lady in the front row. He stammered. Do I hear 1.1? Silence. Julian turned a shade of red that clashed with the painting. He lowered his paddle, defeated. Chloe looked like she wanted to scream. She crossed her arms and slumped in her chair. A petulant child denied a toy. Sold. The auctioneer banged his gavel. I stood up before the applause ended. I walked to the back of the room to sign the paperwork. As I expected, Julian intercepted me near the exit. He could not help himself. He was drawn to money like a moth to a bug zapper. That was quite a display, he said, putting on his charming CEO smile. I am Julian Thorne, Sterling and Architects. I stopped and looked him up and down. I kept my glasses on. I know who you are. Mr. Thorne, I said, letting the fake accent drip with disdain. You are the man who is currently over-leveraging his assets to build that glass needle in Midtown, the Summit. Is it not? Julian's smile faltered. How did you know that it is my business to know where the bodies are buried? I said, I am Vivian Croix. I represent a European fund looking for opportunities. We specialize in distressed assets. I saw the hunger flare in his eyes. Distressed assets. That was exactly what he had. Chloe appeared at his elbow, eyeing my outfit with jealous calculation. Who is this? Julian? She asked, her voice shrill. Vivian Croix? I said, not offering my hand. And you must be the intern. Chloe's mouth dropped open. Excuse me, I am his fiancée, and the lead architect on the summit. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Lead architect. Darling. Looking at the preliminary sketches published in Architectural Digest. It is clear that whoever designed that building understands structural tension. Looking at you. It is clear you only understand how to spend it. Chloe stepped forward. Her face flushed with rage, but Julian held her back. He was too greedy to let her insult a woman who had just dropped $1 million on a painting without blinking. Ms. Croix is joking. Chloe, he said, his eyes fixed on me. You mentioned you are looking for opportunities. I checked my watch. A diamond-encrusted Patek Philippe I had bought with Harriet's cash. I have $500 million of liquidity that my board wants deployed into the New York real estate market before the end of the quarter. I said casually, as if discussing lunch plans. I'm looking for a flagship project, something iconic. But I hear the summit is fully funded. Julian looked like he was about to hyperventilate. $500 million. It was the answer to every prayer he had ever faked. It was enough to cover the embezzlement, finish the building, and buy his freedom. Well, rumors are often inaccurate, Julian said quickly. We are always open to strategic partnerships, especially with the right caliber of investor. I tapped my chin, pretending to consider it. I am bored with standard investments. I said, if I put money in, I want control. I want to ensure the vision is executed properly. But I am very busy. My schedule is a nightmare. I turned to walk away. Wait, Julian called out. Let us buy you dinner. Tonight, we can discuss the project. I paused. I did not turn around. I do not do dinner. I said over my shoulder, call my office tomorrow. If my assistant thinks you are worth my time, she will slot you in for 15 minutes. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving them standing there. I got into the black limousine that Marcus had hired for the evening. As the door closed, I took off the sunglasses. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It had worked. He had not seen Iris. He had only seen the money. He was so blinded by his own desperation that he did not recognize the voice of the woman he had slept next to for 5 years. The next morning, I sat in the Tribeca loft with Elias. We had set up a burner phone line that redirected to a virtual receptionist service we had hired. At 9 o'clock sharp, the phone rang. Elias put it on speaker. Good morning. Croix Ventures. The receptionist said, Hello. This is the office of Julian Thorne, CEO of Sterling and Architects. A woman's voice said, Mr. Thorne is requesting an urgent meeting with Miss Croix regarding a potential investment opportunity. Elias looked at me and grinned. Tell him Ms. Croix is fully booked until next week, I whispered to Elias, who relayed the message via text to the receptionist. Make him wait. Make him sweat. We let him dangle for 3 days. During that time, Marcus reported that Julian was frantic. He was yelling at contractors, fighting with the bank, and sleeping in his office. Chloe was seen shopping aggressively, perhaps trying to comfort herself. spending money they did not have, finally, on Friday. I let Elias call them back. Ms. Quay will see you, Elias said, using a fake British accent. But not at your office. She prefers a more intimate setting for initial discussions. She will be hosting a private dinner at her residence in Tribeca. Tuesday night, 8 o'clock. Why my residence? Because I wanted him on my turf, and because the penthouse I had rented was technically owned by a subsidiary of the very company Harriet had founded 40 years ago. It was a power move. But more importantly, I wanted to see the look on his face when he walked into a room designed by the woman he thought he had destroyed. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The reflection in the glass was a stranger with white hair and sharp eyes. I am coming for you, Julian, I whispered, and I am bringing the checkbook from hell. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now. All I had to do was close the jaws. The elevator ride up to the penthouse was a journey through a sensory memory field I thought I had deactivated. The smell of the polished mahogany paneling, the specific hum of the hydraulic lift, the way the floor indicator lights flickered between the 30th and 31st floors, it was all nauseatingly familiar. But when the doors slid open, the familiarity vanished, replaced by a wave of aesthetic violence that nearly made me recoil behind my dark sunglasses. I stepped into what used to be my sanctuary. It was a space I had designed with the discipline of a monk limestone floors, neutral tones, invisible lighting, and furniture that whispered rather than shouted. Now, it screamed. Chloe Vance had turned my architectural masterpiece into a gilded cage suitable for a dictator with a taste for disco. The limestone was covered in plush, purple velvet rugs. The invisible lighting had been replaced by crystal chandeliers that hung too low, looking like gaudy earrings on a woman who did not know when to stop accessorizing. There were gold accents everywhere, gold trim on the walls, gold legs on the chairs, even a gold statue of a greyhound in the hallway that looked embarrassed to be there. It was cheap. It was loud. It was exactly what I expected from a 22-year-old who thought class was something you could buy by the yard. Julian was waiting for me in the foyer, holding a glass of champagne. He looked tired. The stress of the failing project was etching lines around his eyes that no amount of expensive moisturizer could hide. But when he saw me, or rather, saw Vivian Croix in a structured black jumpsuit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, he brightened up with the desperation of a drowning man seeing a lifeboat. "Ms. Croix," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for agreeing to come here. I thought a home-cooked meal might be more conducive to candid conversation than a restaurant." I took his hand. His skin was damp. He was nervous. "You have a lovely home, Mr. Thorne." I lied, my voice flat and unimpressed. Though the decor is quite spirited, Chloe appeared from the living room, wearing a dress that was too short and heels that were too high for a Tuesday night dinner. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing. She sensed the threat, even if she did not understand the nature of it. "It is maximalist," Chloe said defensively, looping her arm through Julian's. "We wanted to bring some life into the place. The previous design was so sterile, so boring. It was minimalist," I corrected, walking past her into the living room without waiting for an invitation. "It was designed to frame the view of the city, not compete with it. But I suppose some people prefer to look at the furniture than the skyline." I sat down on a sofa that was upholstered in a fabric that felt like a cheap bathrobe. Julian hurried to pour me a drink. "So, Vivian," Julian said, sitting opposite me, "you mentioned you are interested in the summit. I am interested in returns," I said, taking a sip of the wine. It was a vintage I had bought for our 5th anniversary. He was drinking my cellar dry. "The summit is an ambitious project, 70 stories, a dual-core structure with a cantilevered observation deck. It is risky. It is visionary," Chloe chimed in, sitting too close to Julian. "I designed the cantilever to represent the suspension of disbelief. It is meant to feel like you are floating." I turned my head slowly to look at her. The sunglasses hid my eyes, but I let the silence stretch until she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Suspension of disbelief is a literary term. My dear, not an engineering one, I said coldly. And regarding the cantilever, I was reviewing the public schematics. The load-bearing coefficients for the steel trusses on the north face seem to rely on a wind shear factor of 100 miles per hour. Chloe blinked. Yes, that is standard. For a mid-rise? Perhaps, I said, leaning forward. But at 800 feet, with the wind tunnel effect created by the neighboring Hudson Yards development, you are looking at gusts of up to 140 miles per hour. If you build it according to the current specs, the torque on the 45th floor will crack the glass curtain wall within 6 months. The room went silent. The only sound was the clinking of ice in Julian's glass. Chloe opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Julian, panic flickering in her eyes. She had no idea what I was talking about. She had stolen the drawings, but she had not stolen the intellect required to understand the physics behind them. I had intentionally left that calculation out of the final presentation notes because I carried the math in my head. Julian looked at Chloe, waiting for her to refute me. When she remained silent, he turned to me. His expression was a mixture of awe and unease. You have an engineering background. Ms. Croix, he asked. I know how buildings stand up, I said, and more importantly, I know how they fall down. Whoever designed this, the real designer, would have known about the wind tunnel effect. It seems like a strange oversight for the lead architect. I let the title hang in the air like an insult. Julian shifted his gaze back to Chloe. It was the first time I had seen him look at her with anything other than lust or pride. It was a look of doubt, a seed of suspicion that perhaps his golden girl was nothing more than plated brass. We are reviewing the wind data, Julian said quickly, covering for her. Nothing is finalized. Of course, I said, sitting back. Dinner. The meal was an exercise in torture for them and pure entertainment for me. Chloe had ordered catering from a trendy fusion restaurant, but the food was cold. We ate in the dining room, under a chandelier that looked like an explosion of glass shards. I spent the next hour dismantling Julian's ego. I asked about the zoning permits. I asked about the union contracts. I asked about the specific grade of concrete being used in the foundation. Every time Chloe tried to interject with a buzzword, I cut her down with a specific, technical question she could not answer. By the time dessert arrived, a tasteless mousse, Chloe was sulking in silence, and Julian was staring at me with a strange intensity. You remind me of someone, he said suddenly. My heart skipped a beat, but I did not flinch. I have a common face, I said. No, Julian said, shaking his head. It is not the face. It is the way you think, the way you analyze problems. My ex-wife. She was obsessed with wind shear. I took a bite of the mousse. Was she, I asked, indifferent? She sounds competent. What happened to her? Julian flinched. He looked down at his plate. She lost her way. He said quietly, she let ambition cloud her judgment, or perhaps she just trusted the wrong people. I suggested. Chloe dropped her spoon. It clattered loudly against the china. Can we stop talking about her? Chloe snapped. She is gone. She is irrelevant. We are here to discuss business. Are we not? Yes, business, I said, wiping my mouth with a linen napkin. I turned to Julian. I am willing to save your project. Julian, I am willing to inject $500 million into Sterling and Architects. This will clear your debts, fund the construction, and save you from the bankruptcy that I know is looming over you like a thunderhead. Julian exhaled, a sound of pure relief. Thank you. You will not regret this. However, I continued, my voice hardening, I have conditions. Anything. Julian said. First, I want 51% of the equity in the summit. Controlling interest. Chloe gasped. 51%. That is outrageous. That is our building. 49% of something is better than 100% of nothing. I said without looking at her, and right now, without my capital. You have nothing but a hole in the ground and a lawsuit waiting to happen. Julian hesitated. Giving up control was his nightmare, but he did not have a choice. Fine, he croaked. 51%. Second, I continued, I require total transparency. Before I transfer a single cent, my team will conduct a forensic audit of Sterling and Architects for the last 10 years. Every invoice, every bank transfer, every shell company. I need to know exactly where the money has been going. The color drained from Julian's face so fast, he looked like a corpse. 10 years, he stammered. That is excessive. We have standard audited financials. Standard audits miss things, I said, leaning in. And I do not like surprises. If your house is clean, Julian, you have nothing to worry about. Unless, of course, there are things you have been hiding. He was trapped. If he refused, he admitted guilt and lost the money. If he agreed, I would find the embezzlement, the bribery, and the money laundering. But he was a gambler, and like all gamblers, he thought he could outrun the odds. He thought he could hide the dirty laundry before my team found it. We have nothing to hide. Julian lied, his voice trembling slightly. We accept your terms. Excellent, I said. I will have the paperwork sent over tomorrow. I stood up. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to use the powder room. Down the hall. Second door on the left, Julian said, distracted, already mentally calculating how to cook the books before my auditors arrived. I walked down the hallway. My heels clicked on the marble. I knew exactly where the bathroom was. I had designed it. I stepped inside and locked the door. It was the only room Chloe had not ruined yet. The Calcutta marble was still cool and white. The soaking tub I had picked out in Milan was still there. I looked at myself in the mirror. The white hair, the sharp makeup, the stranger. I gripped the edge of the sink. For a second, the mask slipped. I remembered crying on this floor when I found out I had miscarried our first child. I remembered Julian holding me here, promising we would try again. It was all a lie. He was probably texting Chloe while I wept. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a device smaller than a dime. It was a high-frequency listening bug Marcus had given me. It had a battery life of 6 months and could transmit through concrete. I knelt down. I reached under the floating vanity cabinet, feeling for the rough texture of the unfinished stone against the wall. I pressed the bug into the gap between the marble and the steel support bracket. It was invisible unless you were lying on the floor with a flashlight. I stood up, smoothed my jumpsuit, and flushed the toilet for effect. I washed my hands, staring at the drain. I was going to wash them all away. When I returned to the living room, Julian and Chloe were whispering furiously. They stopped as soon as I entered. I must be going. I said, my driver is waiting. Julian walked me to the door. He was sweating. We look forward to the partnership. Vivian, he said, we shall see. I replied. As I turned to leave, I paused near the velvet sofa in the foyer. Oh, I almost forgot. I said. I pretended to adjust my shoe strap. As I bent down, I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out a small, round object. It was a button, a distinctive, mother-of-pearl button with a small chip on the edge. It had fallen off Julian's favorite tuxedo jacket 3 years ago. I had kept it in my sewing box, intending to fix it, but never got around to it. It was a tiny, intimate artifact of our domestic life. I slid it into the crease between the sofa cushions, just visible enough to be found if someone sat down heavily. Julian will find it, and when he does, his mind will catch on it. He will recognize it. He will wonder how a button from a jacket he has not worn in years ended up on a brand new sofa that his mistress bought last week. It was a ghost story I was telling him, one object at a time. Good night, Julian. I said, good night, Miss Qua. I walked into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the sight of the man who had ruined me and the woman who had replaced me. I checked my phone. The app connected to the bug was already active. The audio feed was crystal clear. She is a shark. Julian. I heard Chloe's voice hiss through my earbuds. 10 years of audits. She is going to find the payments to my father. Shut up. Chloe, Julian snapped. I will handle it. We will create a second set of books. We just need the money. Once the cash hits the account, we can figure out how to get rid of her. I smiled in the darkness of the elevator. Good luck with that. Darling, I whispered. The ride down felt much faster than the ride up. I walked out of the building and into the cool night air. The city lights looked different now. They did not look like walls. They looked like opportunities. I got into the car. Did you get it? Marcus asked from the front seat. I tapped my ear. I can hear them breathing. I said, drive. The audio feed from the bug I had planted in the bathroom of my former penthouse was clearer than I expected. It was high-definition misery, broadcast directly into my noise-canceling headphones as I sat in my Tribeca loft, sipping black coffee and staring at the wall of evidence I had assembled. It was 2:00 in the morning on a Thursday. Most of the city was asleep, but in the master suite of the Thorne residence, the war was just beginning. I cannot fix it. Julian Chloe's voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. It distorted slightly through the tiny microphone. I tried to run the simulation like Vivian said, but the software keeps showing a catastrophic failure on the 45th floor. The glass curtain wall buckles every time, then adjusts the load-bearing parameters. Julian snapped. His voice sounded heavy, thick with alcohol. I do not know how. Chloe screamed. Iris never wrote down the base algorithm. She did it in her head. She was the genius. Julian, I am just the one who colored in the lines. You told me I just had to look pretty and accept the awards. You did not tell me I had to actually keep the building from falling down. There was a crashing sound, like a vase being thrown against a wall. I flinched, but I did not take off the headphones. Keep your voice down, Julian hissed. If the board finds out the design is flawed, we are finished. We need Vivian's money to hire a structural firm to quietly fix the mess before we pour the concrete for the upper levels. We would not need her money if you had not drained the operating budget, Chloe retorted, her voice dripping with venom. Where did it go? Julian. The forensic audit starts next week. Vivian's people are going to see the hole in the accounts. It went to your father, you idiot. Julian roared. I sat up straighter in my chair. This was it. The confirmation. My father, Chloe asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Yes, your father. The great banking tycoon, Julian said, his laugh bitter and jagged. He lost $40 million playing baccarat in Macau last year. The triads were going to cut his fingers off. He came to me begging. He said if I covered his debt, he would use the bank to launder the cartel money through our construction contracts for the next 10 years. It was supposed to be a loan, but then he lost another $10 million on horses in Kentucky. I emptied the Summit accounts to save his life. Chloe, so do not stand there and lecture me about budgets. I hit the record button on my laptop. I saved the clip, encrypted it, and backed it up to 3 different servers. So, Julian had not just embezzled for greed. He had embezzled to pay off his father-in-law's gambling debts to keep their money laundering machine greased. It was a perfect circle of corruption, and now they were trapped inside it. The silence on the line lasted for a long time. Then I heard Chloe sobbing. We are going to jail, she whimpered. Not if we get the Croix capital, Julian said, his voice regaining that terrifying, delusional confidence. Vivian wants to invest $500 million. That covers the debt, the fix, and leaves enough to buy the auditors off. We just have to keep her happy until the check clears. I took off the headphones. I looked at the city lights through my window. Keep me happy. It was time to make them very, very unhappy. The next morning, I initiated phase 2 of my psychological dismantle operation. I did not use a courier. I used the postal service. It was slower, but it was federal, which meant tampering with it was a felony, adding a nice layer of irony. For Chloe, I prepared a manila envelope containing photographs. Marcus, my private investigator, had been busy. The photos showed Julian entering a boutique hotel in Soho with a woman who was definitely not Chloe. She was a brunette, strikingly similar to how I used to look. He was holding her hand. In another shot, he was kissing her neck in the elevator. I included a printed bank statement from a secret account Julian kept in the Cayman Islands information I had accessed using the master key Harriet had left me. The statement showed monthly payments of $10,000 to an agency called Elite Companions, I attached a simple sticky note. He does not love you. He just needs your father's bank. For Julian. I prepared a different package. It contained a dossier on Chloe. Specifically, it contained screenshots of encrypted messages between Chloe and a real estate broker in Paris. She was looking for apartments, expensive apartments, and she was planning to pay for them using funds she had been slowly siphoning from the interior design budget of the penthouse. She had padded the invoices, the velvet rugs, the gold statues, the hideous chandeliers she had billed the company triple the actual cost and pocketed the difference. She had stolen about $200,000. A pittance compared to Julian's $40 million, but to a narcissist like Julian, theft was not about the amount, it was about the loyalty. I attached a note to his package as well. She is planning her exit strategy. Are you? I mailed the packages. 2 days later. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from anxious to toxic. I listened in on the bug while I was having lunch. There was no screaming this time. The silence was worse. It was the silence of two people who were sharing a bed while holding knives under their pillows. I found these in the mail, Chloe said. Her voice was cold, dead. Julian rustled some papers, and I found these. Paris, really. You are stealing from me to buy a flat in the Marais. You are sleeping with a prostitute who looks like your ex-wife. Chloe countered. I heard the sound of paper tearing. We cannot do this right now, Julian said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. We have the charity gala tonight. The press will be there. The share price is wobbling. If we look like we are fighting, the stock will tank, and Vivian might pull out. I do not care about Vivian. Chloe spat. You better care, Julian threatened, because without her money, your father ends up in a barrel at the bottom of the East River, and we end up in federal prison. Put on the dress. Chloe, put on the smile. And if you let one tear ruin your makeup, I will kill you myself. That night, I watched the gala on the news. They looked perfect. Julian wore a tuxedo, and Chloe wore a shimmering silver gown. They held hands. They smiled for the cameras. But I saw the way Julian gripped her fingers too hard, turning her knuckles white. I saw the way Chloe flinched when he leaned in to whisper in her ear. They were terrified of each other. The next step was to separate the pack. A divided enemy is easier to conquer. I had my assistant call Julian's office. Ms. Croix would like to discuss the final terms of the agreement. I told his secretary. Alone. Julian met me at a private members club in Midtown. He looked exhausted, but he turned on the charm as soon as he saw me. I was wearing a white suit, sharp enough to cut glass. Vivian, he said, rising to kiss my cheek. You look stunning. Sit down. Julian, I said, ignoring the compliment. I ordered a sparkling water. He ordered a double scotch. I have been reviewing the preliminary structure of the deal. I said, leaning back. And I have a concern. Name it, he said. Chloe, I said. Julian blinked. Chloe. She is unstable, I said, choosing the word carefully. My analysts have been looking at her social media, her public appearances. She seems fragile, and frankly, Julian, her design input is amateurish. I am putting $500 million into this building. I do not want a 22-year-old amateur making decisions about the structural integrity of my investment. Julian took a long drink. He set the glass down hard. I agree, he said. I raised an eyebrow behind my sunglasses. You do? She is your fiancée. She is a figurehead, Julian said, his voice dropping. She was useful for the initial marketing. The young prodigy angle played well with the press, but between you and me, Vivian, she is a liability. She is emotional. She is irrational. And she is incompetent. So why keep her? I asked. Julian leaned in, his eyes darting around the room to make sure no one was listening. I cannot fire her yet. Her family is connected to the financing. But once your capital comes in, once the project is secure, I plan to phase her out. I will break the engagement. I will remove her from the board. It will be just you and me. Vivian, the adults in the room. He was selling her out. He did not hesitate for a second. He was willing to throw the woman he had destroyed my marriage for into the trash the moment a better offer came along. I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, because I was enjoying the depth of his depravity. I liked the sound of that. "Julian," I said, "I prefer working with professionals. Get the paperwork ready, but I want a side letter, a confidential agreement stating that upon the transfer of funds, Chloe Vance is removed from all executive decision-making powers." "Done," Julian said. I left him there with his scotch and his betrayal. My next stop was the Vance Bank headquarters. I did not have an appointment, but the name Vivian Croix opened doors that were usually welded shut. I was ushered into the office of Richard Vance, Chloe's father. He was a large man, red-faced and sweating, looking like a heart attack waiting to happen. He smelled of cigars and fear. "Ms. Croix," he boomed, trying to sound authoritative. To what do I owe the pleasure? I sat down and placed a sleek black folder on his desk. "I am doing due diligence on the Sterling investment. Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my accent crisp. And I found something disturbing. He stared at the folder. "What is it?" "It appears that Julian Thorne has been compiling a dossier." I lied smoothly. "A dossier on your bank's transaction history. Specifically, transfers involving certain unrestricted entities in Macau and the Cayman Islands." Vance went pale. "That is impossible. Julian is family." "Is he?" I asked. "He seems to be under the impression that the FBI is circling. My sources tell me he's preparing a plea deal. He plans to offer up a bigger fish to save himself, and in the financial food chain, Mr. Vance, you are a much bigger fish than a corrupt architect." Vance's hands started to shake. He grabbed the folder and opened it. Inside, I had placed forged memos created by my brilliant forger that looked like drafts of a statement from Julian to the Department of Justice, detailing the money laundering scheme and pinning it all on Vance. "He is selling me out," Vance whispered. "The little rat. After I saved him. After I gave him my daughter. People do desperate things when they are cornered." I said softly, "And Julian is very cornered." Vance looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am an investor. Mr. Vance, I do not like it when my partners go to prison. It is bad for returns. If Julian goes down, he takes the project with him. I need to know if I should pull my money out now, or if you can handle the situation." Vance slammed the folder shut. "I will handle it," he growled. "I will handle him." I stood up. "Good. I hope you do. Because if the FBI raids your bank, Ms. Croix will be very disappointed." I walked out of the office. I had done it. I had created the perfect prisoner's dilemma. Julian thought he was using my money to get rid of Chloe and her father. Chloe thought Julian was cheating on her and planning to leave her penniless. Vance thought Julian was about to hand him over to the feds to save his own skin. They were a triangle of scorpions in a bottle, and I had just shaken it violently. I returned to my loft and checked the audio feed again. It was chaos. Vance was screaming at Chloe on the phone. "Your husband is a rat. He is a traitor. He is trying to frame me." Chloe was screaming at Julian. "My father says you are working with the FBI." "You liar," Julian was screaming back. "Your father is senile. He is paranoid. I am trying to save us." Everyone was shouting. Everyone was accusing. No one was trusting. I poured myself a glass of wine, a cheap bottle I had bought at the bodega downstairs, just to remind myself of the taste of reality. The alliance was not just cracked, it was shattered. They were paranoid, exhausted, and turning on each other, but they still had one hope, one shimmering, platinum hope, Vivian Croix. They all believed that if they could just get my money, they could win the war against each other. Julian thought he could use it to oust Vance. Vance thought he could use it to pay off the cartel and silence Julian. Chloe thought she could use it to steal enough to run away to Paris. They were all running toward the edge of the cliff, thinking it was the finish line, and tomorrow night, at the signing gala, I was going to be the one to push them off. The trap I built for Julian Thorne was not made of steel or concrete. It was made of paper. Specifically, it was comprised of 340 pages of legal density. drafted by Elias with the kind of malicious precision that only a lawyer with a grudge could achieve. We called it the Master Investment Agreement. But in my mind, I called it the death warrant. I had stipulated that the official signing of the partnership between Croy Ventures and Sterling and Architects would take place privately in the morning, to ensure the funds could be cleared, but the public announcement would happen that evening at the Metropolitan Charity Gala. This was the biggest event on the New York social calendar, a black tie affair televised live to millions. I wanted an audience. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the fall to be as public as the ascent had been fraudulent. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Julian sat across from me in the conference room of my temporary Tribeca office. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot. He was vibrating with a mixture of caffeine and sheer panic. He had spent the last 48 hours fighting a war on two fronts, calming down his father-in-law, Richard Vance, and trying to keep Chloe from burning down the penthouse. "I have the documents here." "Julian," I said, sliding the heavy binder across the glass table. Elias stood behind me, looking like an undertaker in a cheap suit. Julian reached for a pen immediately. "Hold on." His lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, said he was the same man who had evicted me from my home. "We need to review this. It is a substantial document. We do not have time for a full review." "Arthur," I said, checking my diamond watch, "the transfer window for the Zurich clearance house closes in exactly 45 minutes. If we do not sign now, the $500 million will not hit your account until next week, and from what my auditors tell me, you do not have until next week. The construction loans are being called in tomorrow." Julian flinched. He knew I was right. He was insolvent. If he did not get my cash today, the news would break tomorrow that Sterling and Architects was bankrupt. "It is a standard equity agreement." Julian snapped at his lawyer. "We discussed the terms. 51% for Croix. Total control. I know what I'm giving up. Just let me sign." "But the indemnity clauses," Pendleton argued, flipping through the pages. Page 112, Clause 14, Section B. That was the poison pill. It was a representation and warranty clause. It stated, in dense legal language, that the recipient of the funds Julian guaranteed that he held unencumbered legal title to the land on which the project was being built. It further stated that if any material breach of this warranty was discovered, for example, if the land actually belonged to a trust he had forged documents to steal from, then the recipient agreed to immediately forfeit all personal assets, real estate, and future earnings to the investor as liquidated damages. It was a total surrender of his life, hidden in a paragraph about zoning compliance. "We sign now, or the deal is dead," I said, standing up as if to leave. "I have another project in Singapore waiting for my capital." Julian grabbed the pen. "Give it to me," he ordered. "Julian, I advise against." Pendleton started. "Shut up," Arthur Julian shouted. He signed his name with a flourish. Julian Thorne. He initialed the bottom of every page. He did not read a single word. He was staring at the promise of $500 million, blinded by the glare of his own salvation. "Done," he said, pushing the binder back to me. "Transfer the money." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had given him in weeks. "The transfer is initiated," I said. "It will take 12 hours to clear the international banking protocols. You will have the confirmation at the gala tonight." Julian slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "Thank you. Vivian, you saved us." "I did not save you. Julian, I just processed you." As soon as Julian and his lawyer left the building, Elias locked the door. "Did he read it?" Elias asked. "He did not even glance at it." I said. "Then he is dead," Elias said, closing the binder. "As of this moment, because he signed a contract claiming he owns land that actually belongs to you, he is in breach. You own his apartment. You own his car. You own the shirt on his back." "Not yet," I said. "Now we trigger the second trap." I opened my laptop. I had a secure channel open to the Securities and Exchange Commission and a direct line to the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I had prepared a digital package containing everything Harriet had collected: the original deed to the land proving the Silverton Trust ownership, the recordings of Julian admitting to the money laundering, the emails between the Vance Bank and the offshore shell companies, and now, the signed contract where Julian committed securities fraud by selling equity in a project he did not legally own. I pressed send. I picked up the phone. I called Agent Miller. The contact Marcus had verified as incorruptible. This is the source. I said into the burner phone, "The package has been delivered. The target will be at the Metropolitan Gala tonight. I want him arrested there, but I have a condition." I added, "Do not move until 10 o'clock. I want him to make his speech first. I want him to think he has won." "I can make that happen," Agent Miller said. I hung up. The clock was ticking. I had one last loose end to tie up. Chloe. I went to the Sterling offices at 2 in the afternoon. The staff was buzzing with excitement about the gala. They thought the company had been saved. I walked straight past the receptionist to Chloe's office. She was packing a box. Not a moving box, but a box of personal items. She looked paranoid, her eyes darting around the room. "Going somewhere?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Vivian." Chloe jumped. "No, just tidying up." I walked in and closed the door. I took off my sunglasses. "I just came from the signing." I said, "Julian signed the deal." Chloe let out a nervous laugh. "Good. That is good. We are safe. He is safe," I corrected. "You are not?" Chloe froze. "What do you mean?" I sat on the edge of her desk. "Part of the deal, Chloe, was a restructuring of the executive team. Julian insisted on it. He signed a side letter removing you from the board. He also signed a document blaming the budget overruns on your incompetence. He threw you under the bus to get my money." I watched the blood drain from her face. It was like watching a light bulb burn out. He would not do that," she whispered. "He did." I lied. "He told me you were a liability. He told me you and your father were the ones laundering the money, and he was just a victim. He is planning to testify against you. Chloe, he is going to send you to prison to save himself." Chloe began to shake. It was a violent, full-body tremor. The betrayal was too much for her fragile, entitled mind to process. "He cannot," she stammered. "I have files. I have proof." "Then you better secure it," I said coldly. "Because once the money hits the account tonight, his security team is coming to wipe your servers. If I were you, I would make a copy of everything, right now, every email, every ledger, every dirty secret." I returned to the loft. It was empty. Marcus and Elias had gone to the gala venue to coordinate with the authorities. I was alone. I stood in front of the full-length mirror. I reached up and found the pins holding the platinum wig in place. I pulled them out one by one. The white hair fell away, revealing the short, natural brunette fuzz that was starting to grow back. It was not much, but it was mine. I peeled off the false eyelashes. I scrubbed the heavy contouring makeup off my face until my skin was clean and raw. Iris Silverton stared back at me. She looked older than she had 6 months ago. Her eyes were harder. Her mouth was set in a line that suggested she had forgotten how to smile for joy. Only for victory. I walked to the garment bag hanging on the industrial rack. I unzipped it. Inside was a dress. It was not something I had bought. It was something I had designed and sewn myself, years ago, for an award ceremony I was supposed to attend with Julian. He had told me not to wear it. He said it was too bold, too aggressive. He said I should wear black, so I did not outshine him. The dress was red, a deep, violent crimson, like oxygenated blood. It was structured architectural silk, with a sharp, plunging neckline and a silhouette that looked like a flame frozen in time. I stepped into it. The silk felt cool against my skin. I zipped it up. It fit perfectly. It was armor. I put on the shoes, black stilettos with a steel heel. I put on the necklace, the only piece of jewelry Harriet had left me, a simple diamond choker that sat at the base of my throat like a blade. I did not put the wig back on. I did not put the glasses back on. Vivian Croix was dead. She had served her purpose. She had signed the checks and set the traps. Tonight, Iris Silverton was returning from the grave. I looked at the clock. 7:30. The gala started at 8. I picked up my clutch. Inside was not money, but a single USB drive containing the video footage from the penthouse bug. I walked out of the loft. The limousine was waiting. To the Metropolitan Museum. I told the driver. The drive uptown was a blur of lights. I felt calm. It was the calm of a demolition expert who has set the charges, checked the wiring, and is now walking toward the plunger. There is no fear left. Only the anticipation of the boom. We pulled up to the red carpet. The flashbulbs were blinding. The paparazzi were screaming names. Julian Thorne. Chloe Vance. Over here I saw them ahead of me. They were posing on the steps. Julian looked triumphant, his arm around Chloe's waist, but Chloe looked like she was about to vomit. Her smile was a rictus of terror. She was clutching her purse tightly against her side, the purse that contained the hard drive. They did not see me. I waited in the car until they had moved inside. I stepped out. "Who is that?" a photographer yelled. Is that the ex-wife?" "Wait, that is Iris Silverton." The whispers started like a ripple and turned into a wave. I walked up the red carpet. I did not stop for photos. I did not smile. I walked with the stride of a woman who owns the pavement beneath her feet. I entered the great hall. The room was transformed into a glittering cavern of flowers and light. The city's elite were there: bankers, politicians, socialites, the very people who had shunned me, the very people who had laughed when Julian destroyed me. They turned to look. The room went quiet. A hush spreading outward from the entrance as people recognized me. I saw Arthur Pendleton drop his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor. But no one looked at the mess. They were looking at the ghost in the red dress. I walked through the crowd. I felt their eyes. I felt their confusion. They were wondering why the disgraced, bankrupt ex-wife was here, looking like a queen. I saw Julian across the room. He was talking to the mayor. He was laughing. He held a glass of champagne high. Then he turned. He saw me. His smile froze. He blinked, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He squinted. He was looking for Vivian. He was expecting the white hair, the sunglasses, but he saw Iris. And then, slowly, horrifically, the realization hit him. The structure of my face, the way I stood, the voice he had heard for weeks, disguised by an accent but fundamentally the same. The blood drained from his face so completely that he looked like a wax figure. He dropped his glass. I stopped 10 feet away from him. The crowd had parted, creating a circle around us. It was a gladiatorial arena. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was clear, unaccented, and sharp enough to cut bone. "Iris," he whispered. It was a sound of pure terror. I smiled, and in that smile, he saw everything. He saw the vault. He saw the contract. He saw the trap. "Did you receive the transfer confirmation?" I asked. Or should I say, "Did you enjoy dinner last Tuesday?" He staggered back, clutching the edge of a table for support. You are..." He could not even say the name. "I am the investor. Julian, I am the landowner. And as of this morning, thanks to the contract you signed without reading, I am the owner of everything you thought was yours." Chloe stepped forward, her eyes wide. You are Vivian." I looked at her. I looked at the purse she was clutching. "And you, Chloe, did you make the backup? Did you save the files?" She nodded dumbly. "Good," I said, "because the FBI is going to need them." At that moment, the doors to the hall burst open, but it was not waiters bringing the main course. It was 12 agents in windbreakers labeled FBI. The trap snapped shut. The heavy velvet curtains of the Metropolitan Museum of Art stage parted, revealing Julian Thorne and Chloe Vance to a sea of expectant faces. The glare of the spotlights was blinding, a wall of white heat that separated the gods on the platform from the mortals in the audience. I stood in the wings, shrouded in shadow, watching the performance of a lifetime. They looked magnificent. I had to admit, Julian was the picture of the redeemed Titan. His tuxedo crisp, his smile projecting a confidence that had been bought and paid for with money that did not exist. Chloe stood beside him, shimmering in silver, clutching the microphone like a scepter. They had retreated to the stage after the initial confusion in the hallway. Desperate to regain control of the narrative, they believed that if they could just make the announcement, if they could just say the words $500 million, the reality of their crimes would dissolve into the applause. They thought the contract was signed. They thought Vivian Croix had saved them. Julian stepped forward, raising a hand to silence the polite applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Tonight is not just a celebration of architecture, it is a celebration of resilience. There were rumors that Sterling and Architects was faltering. There were whispers that our vision for the summit was too bold, too expensive, too dangerous." He paused for dramatic effect, squeezing Chloe's hand. "But tonight, we silence those whispers. I am proud to announce that we have secured a historic partnership with Croix Ventures, a capital injection of $500 million that ensures the summit will rise to define the New York skyline for the next century." The applause was thunderous. The elite of New York loved a comeback story, especially one that involved obscene amounts of money. Julian beamed. He looked at Chloe and nodded. It was her turn. She stepped up to the microphone, basking in the adoration. She looked down at the front row, where her father, Richard Vance, was wiping sweat from his forehead. Then she looked further back, scanning the faces of the women who had snubbed her, the critics who had doubted her, and then, I saw it. She smiled. It was not a smile of gratitude, it was the smirk, the same twist of the lips she had given me in the boardroom 6 months ago. It was a microscopic gesture of supreme arrogance, a silent declaration that she was better, smarter, and more deserving than the rest of the world. She had stolen my husband, stolen my design, and now, she believed she had stolen my future. "I would like to thank my partner, Julian," Chloe said, her voice dripping with false humility. "And I would like to say to everyone who doubted us, genius always finds a way." That was the cue. I pressed the enter key on the tablet I was holding, the massive LED screen behind them, which displayed the rendering of the summit, flickered violently. The image of the shining tower dissolved into static. The audio system let out a high-pitched screech that made the audience cover their ears. Julian turned around, waving frantically at the tech booth. "Cut it. Cut the feed." But the feed did not cut. The static cleared, replaced by a grainy, black and white video. The angle was low, shooting up from under a bathroom vanity. The audio boomed through the hall. Crystal clear. "We are going to jail. Chloe." The voice of Julian Thorne echoed through the museum. "Not if we get the Croix capital," the recorded voice of Julian continued. "Vivian wants to invest $500 million. That covers the debt, the fix, and leaves enough to buy the auditors off." The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. On stage, Julian froze. He looked up at the giant screen, watching his own destruction play out in high definition. "It went to your father, you idiot," the recording continued. "He lost $40 million playing baccarat in Macau. The triads were going to cut his fingers off." Chloe dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She stepped back, shaking her head, her hands covering her mouth. "So do not stand there and lecture me about budgets." The recording of Julian roared. "I emptied the summit accounts to save his life." The video looped. "I emptied the summit accounts. I emptied the summit accounts." The room erupted. It was not applause this time. It was the sound of scandal. People were standing up, pointing, shouting. The camera flashes went into a frenzy, a strobe light of disaster capturing every second of their humiliation. Julian ran to the side of the stage, screaming at the stage manager, "Turn it off. I will sue you. Turn it off." But the system was locked. I had bypassed the main server. The only person who could turn it off was me. I handed the tablet to Elias, who was standing beside me in the wings. "It is time," I said. I stepped out of the shadows, the spotlight operator, confused and following the movement, swung the main beam away from the chaotic center stage and onto me. The red dress blazed under the light. The architectural silk held its shape like armor. I walked onto the stage, the steel heels of my shoes clicking a rhythm of inevitable justice. The crowd quieted down, confused. They saw a woman in red walking toward the two people whose careers had just been incinerated. Julian turned. He saw me. He squinted against the light. "Vivian," he choked out. I did not stop walking until I was center stage. I reached down and picked up the microphone Chloe had dropped. I stood between them, a pillar of fire between two piles of ash. I looked at Julian, then I looked at Chloe. "Hello?" "Chloe?" I said. My voice was calm, amplified to fill the cavernous hall. She stared at me, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. She looked at my short, natural hair. She looked at the structure of my face, stripped of the heavy makeup I had worn as Vivian. "Iris," she whispered. The name rippled through the front row. Iris Silverton, the disgraced wife. I turned to the audience. "For the last month, you have known me as Vivian Qua." I said, "I created her because it was the only way to get a seat at the table. Because in this world, money is the only language you speak." I turned back to Chloe. "You smirked. Chloe, just now, and 6 months ago, when you threw me out of my own building, you whispered that I was trash. You said I was unworthy of your elite circle." I took a step closer to her. She shrank back, trembling. "You thought this circle was defined by how much money you could steal, or how many lies you could tell. You thought you were standing on top of the world." I reached into the bodice of my dress and pulled out a folded document. It was old. The paper was yellowed. It was the original deed Harriet had left me. "But you forgot one thing," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "You are not standing on top of the world. You are standing on my land." I held the deed up to the light. "This is the original land deed for the site of the summit," I announced. "Purchased 32 years ago by the Silverton Trust. The beneficiary is me, Iris Silverton. The transfer documents Julian Thorne used to build his tower were forged. The sale was a lie. The ownership was a lie. I threw the deed at Julian's feet. You built a billion-dollar tower on stolen ground. Julian, and today, you signed a contract with Vivian Qua, who is me guaranteeing that you own the land. By signing that document, you triggered the liquidation clause." I looked him dead in the eye. "I own the building. I own the company. I own your penthouse. I own the clothes on your back. And I own the evidence that is currently being transmitted to the federal authorities." Julian looked at the papers on the floor. He looked at the screen where his voice was still confessing to money laundering. He looked at the crowd, who were looking at him with the same expression one views a roadkill. He snapped. The facade of the gentleman's CEO cracked and fell away, revealing the cornered animal underneath. "You bitch!" he screamed. He lunged at me. His hands were curled into claws, reaching for my throat. He wanted to silence me. He wanted to crush the truth out of existence. The crowd screamed, but he never touched me. 2 men in dark suits, my personal security, hired with Harriet's money, materialized from the wings. They intercepted him mid-air. One of them grabbed Julian's arm and twisted it behind his back with a sickening pop. The other slammed him face first onto the stage floor. Julian thrashed against the wood, his tuxedo tearing. "It is a lie," he shrieked. His face pressed against the floorboards. "She is the fraud. She is the thief. I am Julian Thorne. You cannot do this to me." Chloe stood frozen, watching the man she had conspired with being pinned down like a criminal. She looked at me, pleading. "Iris," she sobbed. "I did not know. He made me do it. Please, we were friends once." I looked at her. I remembered the soup we used to share. I remembered the laughter. And then I remembered the smirk. We were never friends. "Chloe," I said coldly, "you were just waiting for your turn to hold the knife." I turned my back on them. That was when the sound cut through the chaos. Sirens, not one or two, but a symphony of them. The wail of emergency vehicles penetrated the thick walls of the museum. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high glass windows of the Great Hall, painting the gala in the colors of the law. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall burst open. FBI, everyone stay where you are. 12 agents in tactical gear poured into the room. They moved with precision, flanking the aisles, securing the exits. Agent Miller walked down the center aisle. He looked at the stage. He looked at Julian pinned on the floor. He looked at Chloe shaking in her silver dress. And then he looked at me. He nodded once. I stood center stage in my red dress, holding the microphone. The victor's smile was not a smirk. It was not a gesture of arrogance. It was the calm, flat expression of a woman who had watched the world burn down and had been the one to strike the match. The circle was closed. The elite were witnessing their own cannibalism, and I was the only one left standing. The arrival of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at a black tie gala is a sensory experience that no amount of Hollywood cinema can accurately replicate. It is not cinematic. It is jarring, dissonant, and terrifyingly efficient. The agents did not run. They swarmed. They moved like a colony of dark ants dissecting a carcass, cutting off escape routes, securing exits, and creating a perimeter of silence around the stage where the ruins of the Thorne and Vance empire lay scattered. Agent Miller stepped onto the platform, his heavy tactical boots thudding against the polished wood where Julian had been pinned by my security team. He looked down at my husband, then at Chloe, and finally gestured to a team of agents in the front row. Richard Vance, the banking tycoon who had been sitting in the VIP section, tried to make a run for the side exit. He was a large man, softened by decades of expensive scotch and sedentary power, and he made it exactly 3 steps before 2 agents tackled him into a display of hydrangeas. The sound of the vase shattering was the only punctuation mark the moment needed. Agent Miller pulled a folded document from his vest. He did not shout. He spoke with the bored, administrative tone of a man who was simply filing paperwork, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Julian Thorne, Chloe Vance, Richard Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, securities fraud, and the embezzlement of corporate funds. Julian, still pressed against the floor, tried to lift his head. You have no proof, he screamed, his voice cracking. This is a setup. That video is a deepfake. She faked it. Miller looked at Julian with mild amusement. Then he turned to Chloe. She was standing frozen, clutching her designer purse against her chest, as if it contained the antidote to the poison spreading through her life. Ms. Vance, Miller said, extending a gloved hand. I believe you are in possession of a portable hard drive containing proprietary data stolen from Sterling and Architects, as well as digital ledgers detailing the laundering of cartel funds through the Vance Bank. Chloe's eyes went wide. She looked at me, then at Julian, then at the purse. I was protecting it, she stammered, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had spent 3 hours applying. I was keeping it safe for the authorities. I am a whistleblower. Miller did not smile. He just took the purse from her trembling hands. We will let a judge decide that. Ms. Vance. He opened the bag. He pulled out the silver hard drive, the same one I had watched her load with incriminating files just hours earlier. He held it up. It glinted under the stage lights like a silver bullet. This looks like probable cause to me, Miller said. He signaled his team. Cuff them. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is distinct. It is a mechanical, final sound. Click, click, click. I watched as they hauled Julian to his feet. His tuxedo was torn at the shoulder. His hair, usually coiffed to perfection, was hanging in his eyes. He looked at the audience, desperate to find a friendly face, someone who would intervene, someone who would remember his power. But the audience, the bankers, the politicians, the socialites were recoiling. They were holding up their phones, recording the demise of the man they had toasted 5 minutes ago. A photographer from the New York Times, a woman with sharp instincts who had been crouching near the stage, lunged forward. Her flashbulb popped. White light exploded in Julian's face. He flinched, squeezing his eyes shut. his mouth twisting into a rictus of sheer, unadulterated terror. It was a look of total defeat. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who had played a game he did not understand and lost everything. That photo would be on the front page of every newspaper in the world the next morning. It would become the defining image of the decade's biggest financial scandal, the face of greed unmasked. I stood 5 feet away, holding the microphone I had taken from Chloe. I did not smile. I did not laugh. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It was not joy. It was pity. I looked at Julian, the man I had shared a bed with, the man I had planned a future with, and I realized he had never been a titan. He had always been a weak, greedy man terrified of being found out. He looked at me as the agents dragged him toward the exit. "Iris," he screamed. Desperate. "Iris, please, tell them we can work this out. I will sign the divorce papers. I will give you the apartment. Just tell them to stop." I looked at him calmly. "You cannot give me what I already own." "Julian," I said softly, though the microphone carried my voice to the back of the hall. They dragged him out. Chloe followed, sobbing hysterically, her silver dress dragging on the floor. Richard Vance was marched out behind them, cursing and threatening to sue the entire Department of Justice. The doors closed. The sirens wailed louder as the convoy departed. The gala was over. The empire had fallen. In the weeks that followed, the collapse of the Thorne and Vance dynasty was absolute. It was not a slow decline. It was a free fall. The morning after the arrest, the stock market reacted with brutal efficiency. Shares of Sterling and Architects opened down 80%. By noon, trading was halted. The Vance Bank suffered a run on deposits so severe that federal regulators had to step in and seize control of the institution by Friday. The forensic accountants I had hired, along with the FBI teams, went through the hard drive Chloe had so helpfully provided. It was a treasure trove. It mapped out every bribe, every kickback, and every laundered dollar. The investigation expanded like a shockwave. It did not stop at Julian and Chloe. The files implicated city building inspectors who had signed off on unsafe permits. It implicated a state senator who had received campaign donations from Vance in exchange for zoning favors. It implicated 2 judges who had dismissed previous lawsuits against Sterling. It was a purge, every day. The news reported another arrest, another resignation, another reputation destroyed. But the real drama played out in the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Julian and Chloe were denied bail. The judge, a stern woman who had no patience for white-collar criminals, declared them massive flight risks given their access to offshore accounts. They were held in the Metropolitan Detention Center, and in the cold light of confinement, their alliance dissolved into hatred. I attended the preliminary hearings. I sat in the back row, wearing a simple black suit, watching them tear each other apart. Julian's defense strategy was predictable. He painted himself as a visionary artist who was too focused on design to notice the financial crimes committed by his partners. He blamed everything on Richard Vance and Chloe. I was betrayed by the people I trusted. Julian's lawyer argued, Mr. Thorne had no knowledge of the money laundering. He was manipulated by the Vance family. Chloe, looking pale and gaunt in her prison jumpsuit, did not take this lying down. Her lawyer, a public defender because her assets were frozen, fired back with lethal precision. Mr. Thorne was the mastermind. Chloe screamed across the courtroom. Ignoring the judge's gavel, he forced me to sign the invoices. He threatened to fire me. He told me he would ruin my career if I did not help him cover the debts. He is the one who forged the land deeds. They provided the prosecutors with everything they needed. Julian handed over emails proving Chloe knew about the laundering. Chloe handed over recordings of Julian ordering the forgery. They were drowning. And in their panic, they were climbing on top of each other, pushing the other down to get one last breath of air. It was pathetic. It was inevitable. While they destroyed each other, I focused on the reclamation. The civil court proceedings regarding the ownership of the company and the land were swift. The contract Julian had signed with Vivian Croix was ironclad. The liquidation clause was triggered the moment he was arrested for fraud. Furthermore, the original deed from the Silverton Trust, proven authentic by carbon dating the paper and verifying the notary stamp from 30 years ago, trumped the forged documents Julian had created. 3 months after the gala, the judge issued the final ruling. The court finds that the rightful owner of the land located at 555 Fifth Avenue is the Silverton Trust, the judge declared. Furthermore, due to the breach of contract and the criminal forfeiture statutes, all controlling interest in Sterling and Architects, as well as the personal assets of Julian Thorne pledged as collateral, are hereby transferred to the plaintiff, Ms. Iris Silverton. I walked out of the courthouse with a piece of paper that gave me back my life. And not just my life, his life, too. I owned his penthouse. I owned his accounts. I owned his legacy. The next morning, I went to the Sterling building. I did not go to the basement entrance where I had worked as a cleaner. I walked through the main revolving doors. The lobby was quiet. The receptionists, who had once whispered about my disgrace, went silent as I approached. "Good morning, Ms. Silverton," the head of security. Miller, the man who had escorted me out in the rain, stammered. He looked terrified. "Good morning, Miller," I said pleasantly. "Please unlock the boardroom and summon the board of directors. Mandatory attendance." I took the elevator to the top floor, the same elevator I had ridden down in disgrace. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered it. The mahogany table, the panoramic view of the city, the smell of expensive coffee. The board members were already there. 12 men and women who had watched Julian fire me. 12 people who had applauded Chloe. 12 people who had done nothing while my reputation was shredded. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and obsequiousness. They were survivors. They knew how to pivot. Iris, the chairman, a man named Henderson, said, standing up with a fake smile, "Welcome back. We are so relieved that justice has been done. We had no idea what Julian was doing. We were victims, too." I stood at the head of the table. I placed my hands on the leather chair, Julian's chair. "Sit down, Henderson," I said. He sat. I looked around the table. I made eye contact with every single one of them. "You say you were victims," I began, my voice calm. "But when I was accused of theft, not one of you asked for proof. When I was fired without severance, not one of you objected. When Chloe Vance, a 22-year-old intern, was appointed lead architect of a billion-dollar project, not one of you questioned her competence." I paused. "You were not victims. You were accomplices. You were either too corrupt to care or too incompetent to notice. In either case, you are unfit to lead this company." "But Iris," Henderson protested, "we can help you transition. We have institutional knowledge." "I do not want your knowledge," I said. "I want your resignations." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of envelopes. "These are your termination notices, effective immediately," I said, sliding the stack down the table. "Security will escort you to your desks to collect your personal effects. You have 1 hour to vacate the building." "Termination," Henderson sputtered. "You cannot fire the entire board. The bylaws—" "I rewrote the bylaws this morning," I interrupted. "As the sole owner of the controlling equity, I have dissolved the board. This is not a democracy anymore. It is a dictatorship, and I am the dictator." I pointed to the door. "Get out." They stared at me. They looked for a crack in my resolve, a sign of the soft, accommodating woman they used to know, but she was not there. Slowly, one by one, they stood up. They took their envelopes. They walked out of the room, heads bowed, defeated by the woman they had thrown away. I was left alone in the boardroom. I walked to the window. I looked out at the skyline. The rain had stopped. The sun was shining on the steel and glass of the city. I looked down at the construction site of the summit. It was silent now. The cranes still. The workers sent home pending the restructuring. It was a hole in the ground, a scar on the city. But scars heal, and holes can be filled. I sat down in the chair at the head of the table. It was comfortable. It fit me. I picked up the phone on the conference table. "Connect me to human resources," I said when the operator answered, and get me the file on a young structural engineer named Michael, the one I mentored. I want to offer him a job. Lead architect. I hung up. The revenge was complete. The destruction was total. But Harriet had told me something in her letter: do not just destroy them. Build something new on their ashes. I had burned the weeds. Now, it was time to plant the garden. 2 years have passed since the night the sirens drowned out the applause at the Metropolitan Museum. Time has a way of clarifying things, of washing away the noise until only the structural truth remains. In architecture, we call this the settling period. It is when the foundation finds its permanent resting place in the earth, when the concrete cures to its maximum strength, and when you finally know if the thing you built is going to stand or fall. My life has settled. The legal proceedings were long and exhausted the news cycle, but the conclusion was absolute. The federal court system does not care about charm or pedigree or the cut of a tuxedo. It cares about evidence, and thanks to Chloe's hard drive and Harriet's archive, the evidence was a mountain that no amount of defense lawyering could scale. Julian was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The judge cited his lack of remorse and the sheer scale of the fraud as aggravating factors. I was not there when the sentence was read. I did not need to see him being led away in handcuffs again. I had already seen the only thing that mattered: the fear in his eyes at the gala. That was enough. Chloe received a sentence of 12 years. She cried during her sentencing, begging for leniency, claiming she was just a child who had been manipulated. But the jury saw the texts. They saw the smirk. They saw a woman who was perfectly happy to destroy another person's life until the moment consequences arrived at her own door. Both of them are bankrupt. The government seized everything to pay restitution. The Vance Bank was dissolved. The sterling name was erased from the corporate registry. They are gone, not dead, but erased from the world they tried so desperately to rule. They are just inmate numbers now, wearing uniforms that do not fit, eating food they cannot send back to the kitchen, living in cages much smaller than the penthouse they stole from me. I do not think about them often. I am too busy building. I stand today on the top floor of the building formerly known as the Summit, but if you look at the brass plaque in the lobby, or the sign above the entrance, you will not see that name. You will see 3 words carved into simple, unpretentious granite: the Harriet Center. I did not build the glass needle Julian wanted. I scraped his design. I tore up the plans for the luxury condos that were meant to sell for $50 million apiece to absent oligarchs. I fired the contractors who were charging triple for concrete. I went back to the drawing board. I designed something that breathed. The Harriet Center is not a monument to ego. It is a mixed-use sanctuary dedicated to the arts and to the people who create them. The lower floors contain galleries and performance spaces open to the public. The middle floors are subsidized studios for painters, sculptors, and architects who cannot afford the rents in this city. And the upper floors, the floors where Julian wanted to put his penthouses, are affordable housing units. Real, dignified, beautiful homes for families who have been pushed to the margins of New York. It is a revolutionary concept. A skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan that does not serve the 1%. The real estate developers called me crazy. They said I was leaving billions of dollars on the table. They said I was devaluing the neighborhood. I told them I did not care. I told them I was not building for profit. I was building for legacy. I used the money from Harriet's trust to fund the construction. I used the assets seized from Julian to create an endowment that ensures the building can run in perpetuity without charging exorbitant rents. I turned their greed into a permanent engine of generosity. I also established the Harriet Vaughn Scholarship for Architecture every year. We find 10 students' kids from the Bronx, from Queens, from the places the elite ignore, kids who have brilliance in their hands but no money in their pockets. We pay their tuition, we buy their supplies, we give them internships. I met the first class of scholars last week. There was a young girl named Maya. She was wearing a coat that was too big for her and holding a portfolio that was falling apart. But when she opened it, I saw sketches that made my breath catch. She reminded me of myself at 20. Hungry, talented, invisible. I told her she was not invisible anymore. I stand near the floor-to-ceiling glass of my office on the 71st floor. The view of New York City is sprawling and chaotic and magnificent. From up here, the cars look like toys and the people are just specks. But I do not feel superior to them. I do not feel like a god looking down on ants, which is how Julian used to describe the view. I feel connected. I see the grid of the streets, and I understand the struggle happening on every block. I turn away from the window and look at my desk. There is a letter sitting there. It arrived yesterday. The envelope is cheap and thin. The return address is a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. The handwriting is familiar, though it is shakier than I remember. It is from Julian. I have not opened it. I do not need to read the words to know what they say. He is asking for forgiveness, or he is asking for money. Or he is trying to manipulate me one last time, trying to find a hook he can sink into my skin to pull himself back into relevance. He probably talks about the good times. He probably claims he still loves me. He probably says he has changed, but I have changed too. I pick up the letter. I do not feel anger. I do not feel sadness. I feel nothing. It is just paper. It is just a ghost trying to haunt a house that has been exorcised. I walk over to the small fireplace I installed in the corner of my office. It is a gas fireplace, modern and efficient. I flip the switch, and the flames jump to life, dancing over the ceramic logs. I hold the corner of the envelope to the fire. The paper catches instantly. The flame turns orange and blue as it consumes the cheap glue and the desperate ink. I watch the paper curl and blacken. I watch Julian's name disappear into ash. I drop it into the grate and watch it burn until there is nothing left but gray dust. I do not feel a sense of triumph. I feel a sense of cleanliness. It is done. I think about Chloe's smirk. For a long time, that smirk was the fuel that kept my engine running. It was the image I saw when I woke up in the basement in the Bronx. It was the thing that made me work 18 hours a day. It was the symbol of everything that was wrong with the world, the entitlement, the cruelty, the casual dismissal of anyone who was not born into their circle. I hated that smirk, but standing here today, in a building that bears my aunt's name, surrounded by the work of artists I have helped support, I realize something strange. I am grateful for that smirk. Without it, I might have stayed in that marriage. I might have stayed in that cold, sterile penthouse, trying to please a man who saw me as an appliance. I might have spent my life building glass cages for rich people, telling myself it was enough. Chloe's cruelty broke me. Yes, but it broke me open. It forced me to find the steel in my spine. It forced me to find Harriet's key. It forced me to become the woman who could walk onto a stage in a red dress and burn an empire to the ground. She thought she was destroying me. In reality, she was constructing me. I walk back to my drafting table. There is a fresh sheet of vellum waiting. I am working on a new project, a library in Detroit, a public space, a place for knowledge and community. I pick up my pencil. The weight of it feels good in my hand. It feels honest. They told me I was born poor. They told me I was unworthy of their elite circle. They were right. I was unworthy of a circle built on fraud and lies and the suffering of others. I did not belong there. So I created a new circle. My circle includes the cleaning lady who works the night shift and has dreams for her children. It includes the student who draws on the back of napkins because she cannot afford sketchbooks. It includes the whistleblowers and the fighters and the survivors. In my circle, value is not measured by the balance in your offshore account. It is measured by what you can build when everything has been taken away from you. It is measured by your ability to rise from the ashes and not just survive, but create something beautiful. I look at the blank page. I draw the first line. It is straight and strong. I am Iris Silverton. I am an architect, and I am just getting started. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and resilience. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Iris's journey. If you enjoyed seeing the corrupt elite get what they deserved, please make sure to subscribe to the Crimson Drama Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need a little hope.